There, it's 51 degrees at 7 o'clock.
It's been a long campaign. It's almost over, but not before we hear from the candidates in one final debate of the 2014 election season in Minnesota. This one pits incumbent U.S. Democratic Senator Al Franken, who's finishing up his first term, against the Republican challenger, political newcomer, businessman Mike McFadden. I'm Cathy Wurzer, the host of Morning Edition on Minnesota Public Radio News, along with Kerri Miller from the Daily Circuit.
Hello there. Welcome, everyone. I've always liked the way that Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis thought about political voting and the role that voters play in politics. He said the most important political office is that of the private citizen. In other words, your vote counts. Our goal tonight is to speed you on your way to that vote with important information and more information about these candidates for the U.S. Senate. So shall we begin? Welcome, everyone. Good to have you here.
Thank you. Glad you're with us. And thanks to the candidates. Glad you're here.
Senator Franken, your term in the Senate has been characterized by many as a time in which you've eschewed your previous career as a comedian and you've played it safe. You've even been proudly boring at times. One voter, Paula Manor of Northfield, told the Washington Post recently about you, "I'd like to see him take more risk." So the question is, if you're constantly playing it safe, are you really making a difference?
Well, I don't constantly play it safe. I don't think I've played it safe. I've taken on a lot of special interests. One of the first bills I did was women in Iraq and Afghanistan had been sexually assaulted by military contractors. And they had signed employment contracts in which there was mandatory arbitration. So these women couldn't go to court. So I stood up and said, this is wrong. These women should be able to have their day in court. And I had actually the Defense Department against me. I had defense contractors against me. I had 30 Republicans. I had my colleague Jeff Sessions leading the fight against me on this, but I won.
You also had plenty of senators, including Kristen Gillibrand, on your side.
Well,
it wasn't you against the whole
This is a different issue. That's what Kristen has taken leadership role on is women in the military. This is women who had been sexually assaulted by military contractors. And military contractors have employment contracts with their employees saying that they can't go to court on any employment dispute. They have to go into mandatory arbitration. And this is one of the things in the Judiciary Committee I've led the fight against, is mandatory arbitration. And so I won that battle, and that was after I was there a couple of weeks. I've also been a lone voice in a lot of things. I've been battling the Comcast-Time Warner cable merger. That is about the creation of a behemoth that I think would be very bad for consumers of the internet and consumers of television. They're the largest cable television company, buying the second largest cable television company. They're the first largest internet provider. They're buying the third largest.
Don't Americans love to hate their cable companies? I mean, you
they
know
do.
that
So
this
I've
is
gotten
going to
actually,
be
when I started this fight.
You know that will be a popular issue among average Americans, don't you?
When I started this fight, it was sort of a fait accompli that this would go through. I actually led the fight against Comcast buying NBC, and I didn't win that one, but I got a lot of conditions put on that acquisition. And in this one, I think the tide has turned. And also, you have to understand that Comcast is one of the biggest political donors and has over 100 lobbyists on Capitol Hill.
I want to move on.
And so I was fighting them. So I just wanted to.
Mike McFadden.
Yes.
Do you buy this, that Senator Franken has taken on special interests and won?
You know, I don't. my dad told me a long time ago, look at someone's actions, not what they say. And Senator Franken, I thank you for your service over the last 6 years, but I don't think you've met the standard of a U.S. Senator in this state. As I've gone around the state, and I left my job to run for the U.S. Senate because fundamentally I believe we can do a lot better. We have to do better. And I've traveled around this great state of ours. I've been to all 87 counties. And I got to tell you, my respect for Amy Klobuchar has increased so much in terms of her work ethic. She's everywhere. Everywhere I've been, she's been to. And I can't tell you the number of times that I have been in counties and cities where they haven't seen you, Al, and they say, you've not been accessible. And then in the next breath, they tell me what a great job that Senator Klobuchar is doing. I think she sets the standard for a U.S. senator in this state, and I believe that Minnesota deserves 2 hardworking senators, and I'll work hard for Minnesota. I think you've been invisible. I look at your record. In your first year, in your first term, you've had 0 pieces of legislation turn into law. Amy Klobuchar in her first term. That is not true. No, it is true. In her first term, she had 7 pieces of legislation turn into law. Those are the facts.
That is not true.
It is not true. I've had a lot of pieces of legislation. Pat Roberts, a Republican of Kansas, and I did a piece of legislation together that on these compounded drugs. Lots of people died from this a couple of years ago. We filled that loophole in that. I did the workforce training reform with Lamar Alexander, a Republican of Tennessee, and with Republicans in the House. My first bill actually passed 2 weeks after I got to the Senate. It was to make sure that, I used to go on a lot of USO tours, and I met a lot of veterans who have these invisible wounds.
Go ahead.
TBI and... You know what, I'm talking about pieces of legislation that you've sponsored that turned into legislation, that actually turned into law. Amy Klobuchar sponsored over twice the number of pieces of legislation in her first term. That's the fact.
Mr. McFadden, are you here tonight to say that you, if elected, would be a senator like Amy Klobuchar?
You know what, Amy...
That seems a little odd.
Kerri, what I am here to say is I think that Senator Klobuchar sets the bar for work ethic and authenticity. She represents Minnesota well. She travels every county, all 87 counties, every year. I asked Al Franken up in Duluth if you've been to 87 counties since you've been elected.
Yes, I have.
Do you go there every year? Do you?
No, I don't.
Well, I will visit them every year, and Amy Klobuchar visits them every year. And I believe that that's the bare minimum that one should do as a U.S. senator.
Senator, you were going to say in response?
To which part?
To have you been to every county? Do you feel like
I have been to every county. I have had 1,300 official meetings. I go and talk, for example, on propane. I go all around the state and talk to our turkey growers, our soybean growers. The
elderly paper today, when they endorsed me, this is where you lived when you were 6 years old, said they haven't seen you. They said they saw you multiple times before the 2008 election.
Quick response. I want to get into some.
Let me answer that. They said, this is the Albert Lee paper did endorse you, and they said because I haven't been there since the primary. Now, I was in Albert Lee a few months ago. This is a big state. I have a big responsibility in Washington, in the United States Senate. And you can drive through a county and say you've been in the county. The way that I'm the United States Senator is that there are very, very important in agriculture, in manufacturing.
Lots of
So Senator Klobuchar goes to all 87 counties every year. She thinks that is important as a U.S. Senator. I believe that's important as a U.S. Senator.
I think we're clear on that.
Yep.
I think we'd like to move into some other issues.
But
I'd like to talk about it 87 more times.
Oh.
I'm going to move on.
Let's go to some issues.
Because really, we have a lot of people want to know about this. Both of you called the terrorist group, the Islamic State, barbaric. You both agree on that. The U.S. has been bombing targets in Iraq and Syria. You both agree that needs to be done.
Yep.
But militant fighters are still on the move. The president and the defense secretary says this is going to be a long and difficult effort. Difficult because some critics say the U.S. is not bombing enough targets. It's not employing any U.S. ground troops. So, Mr. McFadden, at what point could U.S. ground forces be warranted?
Well, I supported the president when he announced that he was going to start strategic bombing in Syria. I don't support ground troops. I think the decision that a senator makes to send ground troops from the United States into harm's way is one of the gravest decisions you will make. And for me, I have a criteria. It's three-pronged. One is there has to be a clear strategic objective of the United States at stake. Second is there has to be a very defined scope of mission, meaning there's got to be a beginning and a finish. And third, you have to go in with overwhelming force to ensure victory.
Syrian rebels,
and I haven't heard
want more U.S. help.
I understand that, but I haven't heard from this president an answer to number 2 or number 3. And so until I would hear that, I won't support ground troops at this point in time. I can't tell you how disappointed I've been with President Obama and his lack of foreign policy. I believe that leading behind doesn't work. This is a president, remember that when he was elected 6 years ago, said, I'm going to sit down with the leaders of North Korea, Iran, and Venezuela.
Can we stay just for a moment specifically on ISIL?
Yes,
Same question.
and I do want to go, we have other foreign policy to bring up, but same question to the senator. At what point could the U.S. ground forces be warranted when it comes to this situation?
I also have supported the president's bombing in Syria. ISIS or ISIL does not observe a border between Syria and Iraq. Neither should we. They shouldn't be able to park their weapons that they took from the Iraqi military over there. We should be able to bomb them. I did vote for us to train and equip the, quote, moderate rebels in Syria.
Right.
You know, I'm skeptical about the success of that. There are so many forces in Syria. We're talking about Kurds and Druze and
You sound like you're a little skittish, perhaps, about sending U.S. troops in.
well, yes, I am, because we need to be a little bit humble from what we've seen in, in the Middle East in terms of our ability to, in Afghanistan and in Iraq, to go in there and at such cost to our troops. This is why I was talking about getting service dogs to guys with invisible wounds who have PTSD and TBI. I've gone to a lot of funerals, and so I'm very wary of going into a long land war in that region, and especially when you have, what you have here are radical Sunnis fighting against moderate Sunnis. You have Shias fighting, Iran has supported Assad. And I will, we are negotiating now with Iran. I think that is a very good thing. We're negotiating with them on our nuclear program that the president has held together.
McFadden, go ahead.
Can I step in
Quick response, and then we're
on a
gonna
couple
move on.
things? First of all, this president put us in this position, and this is a president that you've supported every step of the way, Al. 2 years ago, every member of the National Security Council advised this president to arm the Free Syrian Army, including the Secretary of State, and he went against that advice. Every member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff advised the president to keep a residual force in Iraq, and he ignored that. He went against that advice. I think this arrogance and this idea of leading from behind doesn't work. The idea of negotiating with Iran, I think, is a horrendous idea. I think the decision by this president and administration to lift the trade embargo on Iran was a terrible, terrible idea.
They did not do that.
Yes, they did, Al. What they did is they said we're going to lift the trade embargo and we're going to give you 6 months to see if you comply Within,
We lift a very, very, very minor, small part of the sanctions.
one of my best friends, Dan Sullivan, who's running for the U.S. Senate in Alaska and is going to win, was the Undersecretary of State for Economic Development under Condoleezza Rice. He negotiated these trade sanctions. It took him 2 years to get them done because
Go ahead, Senator.
because the countries in France and Germany, those businesses had been doing business in Iran for hundreds of years.
So no sanction relief at all,
The idea-
even though that might open the door to
Doesn't.
negotiations
you
with
lead-
in these talks.
Kerri, you lead from strength, not from weakness. What happens is as soon as we lifted those trade sanctions, those companies in Europe immediately started doing business in Iran. The genie's out of the bottle.
Senator,
you can't put the genie back in. It's
Senator,
naive.
on Iran.
This is just woefully inaccurate. We did lift a very tiny piece of the sanctions against Iran. The sanctions worked. That's what got them to the table. Their economy is crippled.
Do you disagree with
I
that,
absolutely
Mr. McFadden?
disagree. And look at the paper yesterday. The UN came out. Iran's not allowing us to go in and do the inspections that they said they would do.
Do you disagree that the reason that they are at the table in talks is because the sanctions were effective? They want some relief.
I believe the sanctions were effective, and we should have kept them in place, and we should have gotten concessions from them before we lifted the sanctions.
What would have been their incentive to deal?
Their economy was being crippled. That was the incentive to deal, Kerri, and I would have kept them in place. And I think
Senator?
this is a fundamental disagreement that I have.
Well,
with
it's
Al
actually a
Franken.
fundamental factual disagreement. The sanctions regime has held. That's been a strength of this. We've held the P5+1 together. And we've also held the coalition of countries more than the P5+1. The P5+1 are the five permanent members of the Security Council in Germany. And we are negotiating with them now. We cannot let them get a nuclear weapon.
You both, I assume, agree on that.
And we've not been able to go in and do the inspections.
Yes, we have. We
Look
have
at the
been.
paper yesterday in the New York Times, Al. Of course we have not been. This is you are absolutely wrong on this.
This is just
This
fundamental.
president has bungled our foreign policy for 6 years. You've supported him every step of the way. This world is a more dangerous place today because of it.
And there is a question to that, Senator. Are you truly satisfied with the president's response on some of these issues, these foreign policy issues? Are you truly satisfied?
Well, I think that we reacted slowly to ISIS coming into Iraq. We had a problem, which was that Maliki was the prime minister, and Maliki had so alienated the Sunnis in the Sunni part of Iraq that they fled and left, Iraqi military equipment to ISIS, and we had a problem. We had to get rid of Maliki, and we replaced him, or he was replaced by the Iraqi people by a body. So we have now a regime there that supposedly is more Sunni friendly. They're obviously
so we acted too late with ISIS. That's clearly the case.
And you disagree with how the president is proceeding on Iran, and you agree with how the president is proceeding on Iran.
But Kerri,
Is that
much
right?
Well, we don't know if we're going to be successful in these negotiations with Iran. We have a November 14th or something date on that, but
there's a pattern here. There's a pattern here. We had an ambassador that was murdered in Benghazi, and we did nothing, and the world watched. This president drew a red line in the sand in Syria, which was crossed. And the president did nothing, and the world watched. So it should be no surprise as to what's happened in the Ukraine, or what's happened in Gaza, or what's happening in Iraq and Syria. And you know what? This is the president who came back from vacation after we had the beheading of 2 journalists, and when he was asked about our strategy for Syria, said, we don't have one.
Senator,
that's not acceptable. That's a pattern.
A response, and then we'd like to move on.
okay.
if
Well,
we
he's been
could.
talking about leading from behind and the crossing the red line. That was when Assad used chemical weapons against his own people. At that time, I said that I agreed with the president that we should do some limited bombing of Syria, that was an unpopular position that I took. I led. And, but Mr. McFadden was asked, along with all the other Republican candidates for Senate at the time, by Minnesota Public Radio, what he would do there. Now, every one of the other candidates answered. Mr. McFadden didn't, because it was a difficult answer. He was called twice by NPR and did not respond. This is a very responsible job.
Suggesting that he wanted to get more information, or suggesting that
there was no response whatsoever.
Al, we get asked. You know, you've been a U.S. Senator for 6 years. You ran for the U.S. Senate. I get asked questions by reporters all the time through my team, and as to I absolutely support the president when he takes action.
This was the central issue of the moment.
Al, everyone in Minnesota watched you last weekend on the WCCO debate when you were asked whether you supported travel bans from West Africa. And 5 times in a row you wouldn't answer the question directly. So don't.
Why didn't you answer the question, though, when it was posed to you at the time?
Cathy, I don't know. I could have been at a hockey game. I could have been traveling. We get asked questions
Hang on, audience.
All the time.
Keep
What I'm very clear in terms of my view of foreign policy, I believe that we have to not lead from behind. We have to, as soon as that red line, first of all, you got to be very careful about when you draw a red line in the sand. But as soon as that's crossed, you have to go in with force.
Can we?
That
would
was
it be
the
all right
issue
if
that
we,
you wouldn't.
Would it be
that
all
Mr.
right?
McFadden
I've been
wouldn't
very
respond
clear
to.
about
Would it be all right
my
if we moved
position
on
on
to
foreign
another
policy.
topic?
I'm sorry?
Would it be all right if we moved on to another topic?
Fine
Do you
with-
feel like
fine
we've
with me.
covered this sufficiently?
Yeah.
All right.
We're in agreement there.
Senator, as you know, President Obama has deported nearly 2 million people who were in the country illegally, don't have documents to be here. If those people don't have the legal right to be here, is the president doing the right thing?
I'm very proud of the role I played in the bipartisan immigration bill that we passed in the Senate, that we marked up, that we
I'm
wrote.
asking you about his deportation policy
I'm
specifically.
talking about we need to have an immigration bill.
Right.
So that we don't have to deport these people.
In the
People who are-
absence of an immigration bill, is the president doing the right thing, in your view, to deport nearly 2 million people who don't have the documents to be
Well,
here?
that's been over the course of 6 years.
Yes.
And I think that
He's deported more people than President Bush
he
did.
has.
Is he doing the right thing, in your view?
I think that there's prosecutorial discretion that should be exercised, and I do wish that there would be more judgment used to not deport people who have been obeying the law here other than their status, and who have family here, who are contributing. You know, we in our office have stopped a number of deportations for the very reason.
So-
a mother who has her kids here, young kids who she can take care of, I think that it's bad for them. It's bad for her.
So the
I think it's
president-
bad for our community.
I do want some clarity
yes,
on this.
I've been
He
critical
should
of it.
not be deporting people who
There are
are here
people-
illegally.
There are people who are here illegally who should be deported. But I think that there is prosecutorial discretion that should be used in cases where it doesn't benefit the community, it doesn't benefit anybody.
So deport the people that have
Yeah, the
committed
people who-
criminal crimes and leave everybody else here?
No.
How would you decide?
I would say, for example, which we got waived, we got a woman who was was taking care of her kids. And if she was deported and her husband was here, her husband was working, it would have been incredibly
I
difficult
assume
for the
that
family.
out of
The
those
Republican
nearly
was
2
leaving.
million, there were a lot of people here who had children.
Yeah,
that the
and
president
this is why
sent back.
That's why maybe I'm not making myself clear. That's why I've been critical.
So the president is doing the wrong thing when he deports people who are here without their documents.
No, I'm saying that
What are you saying?
I think it's being pretty clear.
I'm not clear on this.
I don't want to hear hisses and boos, okay?
I think I'm being pretty clear that I think that you have to use some judgment. There are some people that should be deported, and there are other people that there are cases where they shouldn't be. I don't understand what's not clear about that.
Mr.
really,
McFadden?
Well, I think the president's role is to execute the law on the law, and I think laws have been broken. But I think this raises a broader issue as to the need for immigration reform. Because I think what Elle's going to is it tears, as a human, as an individual, as someone that has compassion, that cares about people. I look at these families, I don't want to separate families, but at the same time, I recognize that the law has been broken. And that's why we need an immigration bill that gets passed that addresses the 11 million people that are here illegally.
Absolutely.
And what I'd like to see is something along the lines of, first of all, we got to secure the border.
What does that mean? What does a secure border look like to you?
Well, what it looks like is what it didn't look like in August when we had people streaming across at these children from Central America. But what it's a combination of fences, of added border patrol. What I would do is rely on feedback from the Border Patrol, from our armed forces, and from the governors that border from those states that border our border with Mexico.
So is that,
Can I talk a little bit
is
about...
that more money, more resources, more people at the border? Is that what that secure
Yeah, it's a
border looks
combination.
like?
It's a combination and of money and resources.
Senator, just one follow-up on the deportation, if I could, and then we'll come back. Were you one of the Democratic senators who went to the president when he was considering an executive order that would change his policy on deportation? Were you one of the senators who went to him and said, don't do that before the election?
No, I did not go to the president and talk to him about that.
What
Now,
did you?
Can I just
Did you
address-
want him to sign that executive order, changing deportation policy? Because it was reported in Politico that you were one of the senators who said, don't do it.
I was a senator who said that this should be done by Congress, and we need to, I agree with Mike, we need comprehensive immigration reform. But let me say something about border security and about this, the number of people who came from Central America. This wasn't a matter of border security. People weren't streaming across the border. Those people were looking for border security to surrender to. This was not about, now, our immigration bill will increase the number of border security. I also wrote a piece in the bill, a piece of legislation that got passed, an amendment of mine, that would make sure that children have lawyers. And I did this was well over a year ago, anticipating this, because there were 8-year-old children coming across at that time who literally would have to defend themselves in a court in Texas against a prosecutor who, and they spoke no English. I'm talking about 8-year-old children. So I got something that was passed, I believe, unanimously in the Judiciary Committee to change from HHS, the Health and Human Services responsibility on this, to the Department of Justice.
So you both agree that there should be an immigration bill?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Differ
we're in
in
total
what
agreement.
should be in it?
It was one of the few bills to pass in the Senate.
This passed in a very, very large
major bills to
bipartisan
pass.
way, and I'm very proud of that process that we did in the Senate. I'm very disappointed, of course, in the House, but this was the Gang of Eight. We're talking about Marco Rubio, we're talking about Jeff Flake, Senator McCain.
Excuse me, would you have supported the Senate bill that passed?
Yes, I would have.
You would have?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm curious about a listener, Fred.
And I just, furthermore, I mean, it was Bob Corker and John Hoeven that came in and brokered the deal at the end. They're two businessmen that became U.S. senators, and they put a bill together that got the vote of, I think, 72 U.S. senators. And we have to address immigration. We have to. And it's going to be one of the first.
Well, and then, Mr. McFadden, what do you do about the 11 to 12 million people that are already here?
Well, I think you need a series of hurdles that they have to go through, and that's what the Senate bill contemplated. There are things, Kerri, like subjecting yourself to a background check, proof of employment, fluency, lessons in civics.
Do they have to,
Payment
quote
of
unquote, go to the end
right.
of the line to apply for
At the end,
citizenship?
Yeah, once they go over those hurdles. They've broken the law. Kerri, they've broken the law. And so their penalties have to be paid for breaking the law. And I think that this is a compromise that was reached in the Senate that then moved forward in the House.
Right.
And I want to see immigration reform.
You're listening to the last Senate debate in the 2014 campaign. Senator Al Franken, challenger Mike McFadden are on the stage on the Fitzgerald Theater. I'm Kerri Miller along with Cathy Wurzer.
We've had great audience response. We've got questions coming in online and of course here at the Fitzgerald Theater. And they're great questions, but we want you to, at this point of the debate, to ask a question of each other, if you would please. Mike McFadden, let's begin with you. Would you like to ask a question of Senator Franken?
I would, Senator Franken. Al, I believe one of the biggest issues in this country right now is Washington's broken. It is hyper-partisan. Nothing's getting done. What's been produced over a decade is horrendous, whether it's been a Republican president or a Democratic president. You came into office having been a very, very partisan radio host. You wrote books such as Rush Limbaugh's A Big Fat Liar.
No. Rush Limbaugh was a big fat idiot.
Big
and
fat
other
idiot.
observations.
Yep. All right.
And other observations.
You told Mike Sweeney, the chairman of the Star and Tribune, when he asked you why you want to run for the Senate, you said, and I won't repeat exactly because my mother's in the office, but you looked him in the eye and you said, because I hate those right-wing blank.
That is absolutely, totally not true.
You talked to Mike Sweeney, and my question is, though, I look at your record in the last 6 years. You are the most partisan senator in the Democratic Party. No one has voted more with the Democratic Senate caucus than you, 159 out of the last 161
And the question,
votes.
Mr. McFadden, is what?
How are you going to work with a Republican-controlled Senate? You couldn't work across the aisle when you were in a Democrat-controlled Senate. How are you going to be effective? I believe Minnesota deserves two hardworking, effective senators.
And the question?
I work across party lines to find common ground and have done it in so many pieces of legislation. I teamed up with Senator Lamar Alexander, Republican of Tennessee, to do the first reform of our workforce training system since 1998, to prepare people, to train people for jobs that already exist, that fill the skills gap. I worked with Senator Roger Wicker, Republican of Mississippi, very conservative, to go after the credit rating agencies, the Wall Street credit rating agencies, which gave AAA ratings to all this junk and caused the meltdown, and that passed through Dodd-Frank.
So you are
I worked with, I can go.
You've worked with Roger Wicker, Deb Fisher, I've heard these, Pat Roberts, I've heard these 5 examples.
Orrin
now
Hatch.
In 3 debates. Political
Grassley.
Magazine ranked you last place, 100 out of 100 senators in ability to co-sponsor legislation. The facts don't support what you're saying. You are the most partisan senator. And the reason that I think it matters is because it doesn't allow you to be effective.
The metric that you used in an ad to say that I was the most partisan senator, by that metric, Ted Cruz was considered one of the most bipartisan senators. Now, Ted Cruz led the shutdown of the government.
What this does is, in a bell curve, you are an outlier here. Ted Cruz is an outlier here.
He's here.
You are the Ted Cruz of the
On
Democratic
radio, this
Party.
makes no sense, but
No, this makes a lot of sense, and this is open Congress. You can just go. You can Google it right now. Open Congress. See your voting record. No one has voted more with the Democratic Senate caucus than you.
Is there some reason that you wouldn't just own that, Senator, and say, I am elected from a Democratic DFL state?
no.
Why?
I won by 312 votes, Kerri. So I didn't, I went,
hang
I went to Washington to get work done, to work for the people of Minnesota. I vote for Minnesota, what I think is in the best interest of the Minnesota. And I find common ground. And Chuck Grassley...
See, I think your partisanship has caused you not to be able to be effective. Amy Klobuchar in her first term reached across the aisle, had 7 pieces of legislation become law.
We've gone through
The other 7 Democratic, Democratic senators that were elected in 2008, no one has sponsored less legislation than Al Franken.
I think we covered that.
I think,
I do have a question.
Let me just say one thing.
Senator
really
Franken
quick,
gets
and then I have a question
to
from
ask
an audience member.
Can I just say one thing in response?
Yes, sir.
There is a long list of bipartisan work I've done, some which has led to legislation, some has led to better waivers in No Child Left Behind. Here's the one thing I will do. I find common ground, but I will stand my ground, because I believe when the powerful come after the middle class and those aspiring to the middle class, I will stand up. And so I am for raising the minimum wage.
I think
Mr.
we-
McFadden
So my
is
dad
against.
always
covered
said,
that.
watch a person's actions, not their words. Your actions and outcomes and results. Don't support.
Senator Franken,
Newsweek called me the most
Senator,
effective in this first year
it's
of
your
any
turn to ask
senator
Mr.
since Phil
McFadden
Gramm.
a question.
Okay. This is my question, so you know it's not too long, okay? It's limited to that. Is that okay?
It's those 3 paragraphs?
Wow.
These are, one of the paragraphs is a sentence.
Did you poll it
What's
first?
wrong?
Okay. We agree that the economy is a central issue in this campaign, and we agree on the importance of manufacturing and energy, but I also believe in the increasing importance of the information economy. The internet has always operated under net neutrality, the concept that all content will be treated the same. Our debate here is being carried by NPR's website to people who can listen on the website at the same speed that a blogger might use from University of Minnesota Duluth. Facebook was started in a dorm room. YouTube was started over a pizzeria. Startups and small businesses all over Minnesota will tell you that net neutrality is a key to innovation. But now, for the first time, the FCC is considering changing all that by allowing fast lanes for deep-pocketed corporations.
And so the
question-
A record 3.7 million Americans have filed comments protesting this with the FCC, 99% supporting net neutrality. So my question is, how is it, given that the internet has accounted for 21% of the GB growth in mature economies over the past 5 years, how is it that you continue to dismiss the importance of an open internet to our 21st century economy?
Mr. McFadden.
I support net neutrality. And one of the things that I find so frustrating as a businessman is we have so much regulatory morass in Washington, D.C., and there's no certainty. What they need in the internet right now is certainty. I support net neutrality. Let's get it done. But I got to tell you, as I travel around this
Well,
state,
it is done. Net neutrality is the architecture of the internet now.
But I got to tell you, Al, as I travel around this state, and I've been doing this for 18 months now, you know how many times I've been asked when I've gone around to all 87 counties in this state about net neutrality? 0 times. And you say we agree on energy. We don't agree on energy.
But you do agree,
We
it
agree that
sounds
it's
like,
a
on
big
net
part.
neutrality, on
Yes.
Senator's question.
Well, that is puzzling because,
What have I ever said? I don't agree with net neutrality.
no, but you've dismissed it.
No, I
as-
haven't dismissed it. What I've said is, I could give you so many different examples in this economy right now where regulatory overrun. We have become a regulatory animal that is out of control in Washington. Business wants certainty. They want rules. You need rules for the internet.
So it sounds
Net
like you two are
neutrality.
kind of agreeing on this.
Right.
I want to steer the ship in a different direction for just a moment and go back to bipartisanship, because I have a listener question. Eric is his name. I'm curious, is there an issue on which you agree with the other party, since we're talking
Yeah,
about...
a lot of them. For example,
what?
I'll give a
Give me
couple. the NSA on surveillance. Dean Heller, a Republican of Nevada, and I have the #1 transparency bill. This is going to be part of the legislation that we're probably going to be taking up when we get back to reform NSA surveillance. Now, I voted against both the programs at Snowden, the metadata program and the program that captured internet traffic of foreign persons who were suspected of being involved in terrorism, not because they didn't believe they were needed, but because there wasn't enough transparency. We have to strike a balance between privacy and national security. But if the American people don't know enough, if there isn't enough transparency, the American people can't make that judgment.
Isn't a lot of that transparency blocked by many of the policies of the Obama administration?
Yes, and I was opposed to them. And that's why I voted against both those two programs, which the Obama administration wanted us to vote on for. I don't know if they are captured in this subset of votes that I've voted on that I've been. I agree with Rand Paul on sentencing on mandatory minimums. I think on drug convictions, on people who, there are people languishing in prison who shouldn't be there.
Okay.
Actually, you touched on something kind of interesting, the NSA.
Yeah.
So I want to ask about that in terms of surveillance. By the way, in what cases is it acceptable to conduct warrantless surveillance of citizens, given the NSA furor?
Look, Els chairs the Privacy Committee on Judiciary. We have a balance in this country between security and freedom. And I think we've tipped way too far to security at the expense of freedom. And I'm very, very concerned about warrantless searches of U.S. citizens, period.
Senator Franken.
Sounds like something you two agree on.
We do, and we don't think there should be warrantless. Me and Dean Heller, a Republican from Nevada, agree that there should not be, and that will be part of Chairman Leahy's bill.
And if reelected, would you vote to reauthorize the Patriot Act since it sunsets on June 1st of next year?
There will be elements of it that these national security letters should go. There are aspects of it that should go. I do think, and this is why this is a complex issue, it is important that we protect our national security. It is important that we sweep up the bad guys. It is important that we do that. I just want the American people to have enough transparency, there's enough transparency in this to understand exactly enough of what we're doing to
Mr.
get some
McFadden,
comfort level
you were going to say?
of what is going
I
on.
was just saying, you asked a question, general question about bipartisanship and the ability to reach across the aisle. I wish one of the issues we could find some bipartisanship on is education. We have the worst outcomes in this country, in this state, for students of color. And nobody wants to talk about it. And I think
Who's not talking about the achievement gap?
Well, I talk about it all the time, but you know how many times I've been asked about it on interviews? Very, very few times I have to bring it up. I think it's immoral what's happening in this state, that we have the lowest graduation rate for Latinos, the second lowest for African Americans.
And what does the federal government do about that?
Well, the federal government has a lot to do about it, Cathy. I've been involved in an inner city high school by the name of Crystal
Mr.
Ray.
Ray.
And it's been a real blessing to me to see what our principal and our teacher, Al, you'd love it. You'd love this school, what our teachers.
I've heard great stuff about this.
And our principal have been able to do. 90% of our kids are Latino or African American. We're in one of the toughest neighborhoods.
So where does the federal government
Well, so the federal
step
government,
in?
what I'd like to see is in broken school districts that we dramatically increase the number of charter schools. In Minneapolis, we're spending $21,000 per kid. 64% of the budget is spent on non-teacher expenses. It doesn't get into the classroom to get the worst outcomes in the country. I believe it's immoral, and I look at Global Academy, Seed Academy, Hiawatha Academy, KIPP Academy, Harvest Prep, multiple charter schools that are dealing with a similar demographic as Crystal Ray that are getting similar results. Not just a kind of better way, Kerri, I mean a dramatically better way to do things.
Is that the answer,
And
Senator?
so, but let me just, if I may finish on this. The reason the federal government's involved here is right now the way charter schools are funded, they don't get any local dollars. They get state dollars, Kerri, and they get federal dollars. And as a U.S. Senator, I don't want federal dollars going into a broken school district. I'd rather see those allocated to dramatically increase the number of charter schools in those areas so that all children in Minnesota have the access to a first-class education regardless of zip code. And nothing, Al has been on the education committee for the last 6 years. He's complicit in these results. Things aren't getting better in the inner city, they're getting worse.
Response, and then we'll go on to Affordable Care Act. Go ahead, Senator.
Well, I would like to talk a little bit about the achievement gap, and I think it is a travesty that we have such a big achievement gap in Minnesota. We are making some improvement in the state level. Our black fourth graders are fourth in the nation. We were among fourth graders for black and Latinos. We were the only state in the country that closed the achievement gap among them. Now, here, I would just like to talk about closing the achievement gap and what I think we should do. Early childhood education, to me, is one of the most important things that we can do. I talked to Angela Harvilla. You might have heard her name. She won the National Milken Award. Was one of the best teachers in the country. She teaches fifth grade in Princeton, Minnesota. I called her up just to congratulate her, and we started talking about this, and she talked about early childhood education. Art Rolnick, who is at the University of Minnesota, who studies the economics of early childhood education. Tim Pennies, whose Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation invests 40% of what they do is on early childhood education. Here is what Art Rolnick has found in terms of return on investment. A child who has a quality early childhood education is less likely to be special ed, less likely to be left back a grade, has better health outcomes.
Okay.
The girls are less likely to get pregnant. They're more likely to graduate college. They're more likely to high school, more likely to go to college, more likely to have a good job and pay taxes, and much less likely to go to prison.
So, Mr. McFadden, do you
I don't
agree
disagree with
there's
that.
more investment needed in early childhood?
Look, there's nothing more important than our children. There's nothing more important than our children and our investment. All our children, regardless of zip code. Early childhood education is a very important part of the equation. But what everyone in this state needs to know, and I'm telling you, Kerri and Cathy, because I've gone around this whole state, so few people know that we have the worst outcomes in the country for students of color. And we're spending $21,000 per child in the Minneapolis
And
school
the
district.
answer, in your view, is more money into charter schools.
Yeah, I want to revolutionize how we do education in the inner city.
Is that the way to resolve that?
I have nothing against charter schools. My daughter runs the after-school programs at 3 charter schools in Washington, D.C. that are very successful.
But nothing has been done for 6 years while you've been in Washington.
Specifically,
Actually, we've done some very good things in terms of there's other areas that we need to talk
The
about.
outcomes are atrocious. They're immoral. What's happening?
Is it possible that could you address the suggestion that he made, though, about investing in more money into charter schools as a
Allocating
way
dollars.
to?
Yeah, I would like to.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Charter schools also have spotty records. We have some very successful charter schools, and we have some that aren't very good. And when that happens, and a kid goes to a charter school that fails them, that public school money goes to, I want to make sure that our,
Hang on.
I want to make sure, I'm sorry, I want to make sure that our public schools get what they need. And what I want to work on are, here's the areas where I would, on assessments, we made a lot of progress over the last several years on making sure that we're measuring each kid's growth instead of holding every kid
The results are horrendous. You've been in office for 6 years. We have the worst outcomes. And we pioneered charter schools in Minnesota. And yes, there's some charter schools that are not good. but we've been doing it for 20 years now, and we have multiple examples of ones that are doing great things, and we should replicate them as fast as we can. And as you keep talking about all these different things that the federal government can do in terms of our kids aren't getting a great education.
Do either of you think Race to the Top has helped?
No.
Why not?
I don't.
You do, Senator?
I think it has put money into things that, like early childhood education, for example. We won a Race to the Top a grant that is helping early childhood education in Minneapolis and St. Paul.
Mr.
and
McFadden,
I want-
$4 billion
and-
of taxpayer money
Yeah.
so far. Do you see any evidence?
No, I don't think
that
we're
it
getting the
has-
return that we deserve for that. It's a lot of money. And here, Kerri, here's, we spend a lot on education in this country. We spend a lot in this state, and we should. They're our children, but the outcomes we're getting are unacceptable. And I'm so tired. For 30 years, I've been hearing about how things are going to get better and need more money, more money. It's not a money issue. It's a results issue.
Say, speaking of money, I've got a quick audience question. Many of us are struggling with unfair student loan repayment plans. What can be done, and what will you do? Mike McFadden, quick answer.
Well, I'd like to see students be able to refinance their loans. I also would like to see more transparency at the college level. As a father of 6 kids, 3 of them are in college, education at college education's gone up something like 2.5 times the rate of inflation for over 20 years. And it's the most opaque industry. You don't find out what your financial aid package is until the very end. And there's no transparency. I would like colleges to have to let students know what their job placement is by major and what percent of their kids are getting hired and what their average salaries are, so that students can make an informed decision.
So you're talking about legislation to require colleges to disclose that?
Yes.
At what point? The college visit? When?
I'd like it to be in publicly available information so that you can go and find pricing.
Is this something that you two agree on again?
This is actually a piece of legislation that I've offered that Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa,
Yeah.
and Marco Rubio is on another one on transparency. This is called the net cost calculator. And what it does is that a lot of students don't go to a college because they think they're going to be priced out of it. But you can what I want to do is require colleges on their webpage to put a net cost calculator so you can figure out how much it's going to cost you.
So
now,
you two agree on this?
Well, not only we agree on it, I've acted on it and have legislation that's bipartisan. Marco Rubio has
But it
co-sponsored.
hasn't turned into law yet.
Not yet, but we are.
I mean, there's a lot of.
We are going to be marking up a higher education bill.
And do you agree about refinancing with Mr. McFadden? Do you agree that students should be allowed to refinance their student loans?
I introduced a bill in the Senate to allow 560,000 Minnesotans to refinance their student loans. Mr. McFadden has criticized me for this, and he's criticized me because Elizabeth Warren and I did this. And we pay for it because the actual federal government makes profits off these student loans. So we have to pay for it. And the way we pay for it is the Buffett rule.
We're a little short on time. I'd like to get one more topic in. Could you?
Well, he would protect people who make over $1 million a year, which is the top 1/4% in Minnesota, so that 560,000 Minnesotans can't refinance their student loan.
If the federal government's making money off of it, then there's no issue. Then there's money there to pay for this. The federal government's a $3.5 trillion budget, and the way you have not been a good fiduciary of that or steward of that budget over the last 6 years.
We're a little short on time.
You need to offset it.
No, you just said they're making a profit on it.
We
So,
don't have as much time as I had hoped, gentlemen, to talk about the Affordable Care Act, but I do have a question that I think will produce a shorter answer, I hope. Honeywell has a new health benefits rule under the Affordable Care Act where they're going to penalize employees who won't agree to blood and medical tests to identify whether they smoke or have diabetes or high blood pressure or other problems. Honeywell can do this under the ACA, and they say they need to do it to bring their health care costs under control. Are they doing the right thing, Senator?
Well, the one area that we are trying to bring health care costs down are in areas of preventable diseases. And we're not penalizing someone for having a pre-existing condition, but the one area where you do have to pay more for your policy is if you smoke.
So is Honeywell doing the right thing in instituting these new rules?
I'm not sure that blood tests is the right way to go. I would try to go on the honor system. I think that
There's a minute left before I need to get out of this.
The Affordable Care Act is the cost. We have a health care issue in this country. Al knows it, Kerri, you know it, Cathy, you know it. I just fundamentally believe that the ACA is not the right solution.
Is a company, though, like Honeywell, do you believe, in trying to control
I think
their
they're
health
going to
care
try to
costs,
control their
doing
costs.
the right thing?
They have to, I believe that that's their right to do.
Okay.
If they want to do it, we have a huge cost issue with healthcare in this country that we have to address, and people have to have skin in the game, and they have to understand that if they have certain behaviors, that it's going to cost more. It's their right to participate in those behaviors.
You say they should not be using the rules this way. Briefly.
I feel a little queasy about it, about forcing employees to take blood tests, but no, this is the one area where we're saying if you
When you
smoke,
get life
pay.
insurance and you go, you have to take a blood test. I mean, you can decide not to, and then you pay the penalty on it. We have a cost issue. You know, preferred one's up 63%.
I want to
Healthcare
actually,
costs.
we need to get into closing statements here because we're going to run out of time. I'm sorry,
Wow.
gentlemen.
Time.
Senator
fast.
Franken, I want you to begin your closing statement at this point, and then I'll go to Mr. McFadden.
Well, I want to thank the people of Minnesota for the honor of representing you in the United States Senate. I know that some Minnesotans didn't know quite what to expect from me, but I think most have seen that I work hard, and I work hard for the benefit of all Minnesotans to reform the workforce training system in our country, to write the energy title on the bipartisan Farm Bill, to make sure that our school children can get mental health treatment in our schools. I've fought for common ground, but I also will fight to stand my ground when powerful interests come after the middle class. I believe that the economy works from the middle out, not the top down. I hope that your audience will vote for me, so give me the honor of returning to the United States Senate to work for Americans, for Minnesotans who simply want the opportunity to build a better life.
Think your
Mr.
minute's up.
McFadden.
Cathy, Kerri, Al, thank you. I really appreciate the audience. I thank you. You've been very professional tonight. I think the decision is simple here. If you believe the president has done a good job, then vote for Al Franken. If you believe the hyper-partisan Congress in Washington is doing a good job, then vote for Al Franken. I fundamentally believe that we can be doing so much better in this country and in this state. I believe that with the right leadership, we can have energy independence. We can have a first-class education for all students regardless of zip code. That we can have effective and efficient government. I want to streamline regulation to unleash our economic potential. I'll get the mines open, I'll get the pipelines built, and I'll also get the EPA out of the farmers' fields. I believe our best days are ahead of us if we have the right leadership in Washington. I'm Mike McFadden, and I'm running for the U.S. Senate. Thank you.
Senator Al Franken, Mike McFadden.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Mike, we don't know what's going to happen.
She's the author of the acclaimed Reading Lolita in Tehran, and her new book, which I am so excited about, is called The Republic of America.
I'll get